In August, I made this video to defend the wonderful game we've all come to love, Dark Souls 2. However, that video was focused on the game's criticisms. I wanted to challenge myself by combating the apparent flaws of the game, but many of you rightly complained that I didn't focus in enough on the strengths. So here I am again. This is the companion piece to that initial video where I'll cover the things I love about this game in depth, all the strengths and special mechanics that only appear in Dark Souls 2. I'm splitting the video into two main sections, the first being the big things the game does well, the second being the smaller, special things that may seem inconsequential, but I feel they add a lot to the game. So as usual, remember to subscribe, join the Discord, and let's get started. Let's start with one of the more contentious strengths that some people consider a flaw, but I think they add a lot to the game: life gems. As has been pointed out by many before me, a lot of Demon Souls mechanics reappear in Dark Souls 2, albeit in a slightly changed form. This is one of those mechanics. In the former game you have various forms of grass which work like life gems in that they heal you gradually. However, there's no Estus in that game, you only have grass, which becomes tedious because you'll often have to farm for heals, as you do in Bloodborne. But since the levels are so long and lacking in checkpoints, it's still preferable to have a large amount of grass than a fixed amount of Estus. Not a perfect system at all, but you see the logic. In Dark Souls 2, they add to this system. You have life gems which you can farm for, each upgraded version healing you more and more, but you also have the fixed amount of Estus, which means farming isn't your only option for healing. And since the levels are long and the gameplay slow, the added option of life gems is great for when you run out of Estus. The reason why some people consider the addition of life gems to be a flaw is because it makes the game too easy or less punishing. First of all, despite what gatekeepers with a superiority complex will tell you, Dark Souls as a series is not solely about difficulty, it's not solely an exercise in masochism. Secondly, the game plays a lot slower than the other two. You have to be meticulous in your gameplay and thus you will need more heals as you spend longer in areas. If life gems were in the third game, a much faster game with more shortcuts, this argument would make sense, but they're not. Thus, life gems are one of this game's strengths. Not only do they add variety to the gameplay, giving you more healing options that require more situational awareness, but they also add to the general pace of the game, allowing you to be slow and thorough. They just feel good to use. More options and variety are great in FromSoft games, as Elden Ring has clearly outlined. They make poison easier to deal with, they challenge you to use correct timing, and they're not free heals. You're still at risk when using them, and you'll still be punished for poor gameplay. Honestly, you'll be punished harder for misusing a life gem than you would be for misusing Estus, because with the latter you can often survive the incoming punish hit, whilst with the former you'll just drop dead. If you're actually listening, you'll have noticed I threw out the phrase situational awareness, which is a huge strength of the game I need to give justice. The combination of environmental factors and being aware of your situation is something done brilliantly here. In general, you need situational awareness within these games in order to heal effectively. That's applicable to all three, though it's more relevant in 2 due to the addition of life gems. But in general, not only when it comes to healing, you'll need a lot more of that situational awareness if you want to make the most out of this game. This combines with environmental factors you can use in the levels. You need to be aware of everything going on around you, particularly the level design, as there's plenty of ways to make creative use of it during combat. For example, people often complain about the Shrine of Amana, but it's made infinitely easier if you pay attention to your surroundings. Pay attention to the ledges so you don't fall to your doom, pay attention to the pillars so you can hide behind them and avoid projectiles, pay attention to the water and the enemies hiding in it. As long as you don't run through the level, as long as you pay attention to everything going on around you, using the pillars to your advantage, then you'll get through here just fine. The same can be applied to a lot of levels. Take the Shaded Woods, it's super annoying to get through if you just run through and ignore what's going on around you. But if you use that situational awareness you should ideally have developed in your life, you can use the environment to your advantage. The trees here have faces and wail if you hit them, attracting enemies and making it infinitely easier to clear out the level. It's a similar story in Iron Keep, another largely complained about level. You can use these tight pathways to make the knights run themselves into lava, something I thoroughly enjoy doing. In the second part of the area though, the situational use of the environment is exaggerated, seeing as you can knock enemies into lava using the platforms and burn them with the fiery idols. I think Iron Keep is the highlight of this mechanic, and if you take advantage of it, the area becomes a lot easier. There's also minor usages of this sort of thing in the game. For example, we have the poison pots in Earthen Peak, which the game outright shows to you. And Covetous Demon actually has its own environmental gimmick. You can shoot down hollows to distract it, though yes, I wish this was used on a better fight. We also have the windmill in this area, which you can burn to remove the poison during the boss fight. No, I don't know how or why this works, but there is an NPC who guides you to it, so that's fun. And finally, we have the crossbow in the Pursuer boss fight you can use to completely skip him. I also want to emphasize the use of environment in the making of shortcuts. We first have the fire barrels you can blow up in the Forest of Fallen Giants, then we have the barrel in the Lost Bastille. I do wish there were a few more of these because they are a great addition, but they're still fun. I'm sure I don't need to explain to you why these factors add to the game. As much as I love the other two in the series, there's very little like this in terms of being rewarded for using the environment and being aware of the precise situation you're in. It's harder to achieve on a faster paced game, so it makes sense that 2, meticulous as it is, would have more time to present such environments. I think it makes for a really satisfying playing experience when you're not limited to pressing R1 and hoping for the best, but are instead offered ways to make the most of your situation using the environment. It feels fluid and immersive. It makes you feel like an actual part of the world instead of an intruder moving everything out of your way. On to the next factor. I covered level design in my original video, so there's no need to repeat myself here. I still think the DLC has top tier level design, and I still don't think enemy placement is that bad. But there's one part of the level design that I want to put more positive emphasis on: the colours. Despite a lack of cohesion between areas, a flaw I've discussed previously, I find that such a thing is easy to ignore because of the colours in each area. Whenever I think about Dark Souls 2, the colours are what come to mind first. The iconic fiery palette of Iron Keep, the deep blue and grey of Drangleic Castle, and the warm colours of Majula. The game feels like a joy to explore because of how unique every area is, how vibrant and different they are. If you truly must have fluid cohesion, then this won't appeal to you, but I think the sheer individuality of each level defies my need for a straightforward design. I think my favourite area when it comes to visuals is Drangleic Castle. It perfects that looming, dangerous fortress vibe, and it looks visually appealing despite being made up of miserable shades of grey. I think the inside is great as well. I like how we move along ramparts and through outside sections during our stay here. It adds to the scale of the castle, and creates a maze-like atmosphere at times, which has the effective payoff of meeting Nishandra, a character framed so excellently you instantly know something is off with her. Shrine of Amana is also a highlight. It is such a gorgeous area, and despite any other feelings you may have, I think it's hard to argue against this specific point. Looking at this and Iron Keep side by side, it's weird to think they're from the same game, but I think that range adds to the playing experience. And let me put some emphasis on Majula before we move on. I think it's the best hub in the series because it highlights the series theme of giving up and how tantalizing such a thing can be. Majula is at once a place of peace and danger because it's terribly inviting. You truly can understand the crestfallen knight's decision to give up and stay here, whilst the 2 Firelink shrines don't capture the often irresistible desire to resign yourself to one spot forever. It's such a beautiful, peaceful place. The music, colour and design all add together to create this perfect melancholy, and I think it encapsulates so many themes within this series. I definitely think the colouring is an underrated strength of the second game. I suppose it's easy to glance over when there's points of contention in terms of gameplay and story, but if you really take the time to go and appreciate the colours of each area, you'll find yourself loving the game in an entirely new way. We've still got a ways to go before this video ends because there is a lot to praise. But before we go any further, let me remind you all to subscribe so we can hit that 20k milestone, join our fantastic Discord, and do consider supporting me over on Ko-fi if you're enjoying the content. Whatever you do, it means a lot and really does help me out. I'm sure this factor is controversial, but I think the storyline of this game is very good and a great continuation of the first game, despite some people's misguided beliefs that Drangleic is completely disconnected from the rest of the series. The game does have a standalone story separate from Dark Souls 1 and 3, which is a direct continuation of the first game. The main premise revolves around the war on the Giants, as we know, and despite it not having a direct connection to the rest of the series, I still find it compelling. Of course, it's thematically linked to the series. It reflects the cycle of warfare and emphasises the series' focus on power and violence. Gwyn warred against the dragons in order to assert his patriarchal order over the land, and Vendrick warred against the Giants in order to further establish his kingdom under the advice of Nishandra. Both expressions of the need for power, and both exercises in violence. I wish we learnt more about the Giants, but they're still an interesting peoples. I really like their designs. They're simple, unnerving, but also beautiful when you see them sprout into trees. It would have been amazing to see more of their society and customs, but unfortunately we're limited in that respect. Still, they're a great component of the game, and definitely original because some people argue that Dark Souls 2 just rehashes everything from the first game in a slightly different skin. Certainly there's repeated concepts, but that's because this series is very interested in addressing cycles. On the other hand, some people are under the impression that this game is disconnected from the other two, but that's a complete misconception. Whilst it isn't a direct continuation taking place within Lordran, it's definitely a thematic continuation. Drangleic, like Lordran, is another empire on the brink of ruin when we arrive, riddled with violence and war with the curse of the undead looming over humanity. The ruler is decrepit and long forgotten, leaving behind a dying kingdom which will inevitably rot. But there's a lot of evolutions within this continuation. It has more things to say. It certainly isn't a stale recreation of the first game. I think the most significant example of this is how specific aspects of humanity are explored through the four queens, for they're all shards of Manus, all shards of his powerful Dark Soul. As direct life forms from the Dark Soul, we can see them as versions of us closer to that primordial humanity that received direct portions of the Dark Soul eons ago. The queens are all very interesting characters, as I've previously covered, and of course their relation to Manus links the series together. They're also further evidence for this game being a thematic continuation, for Dark Souls is particularly interested in what makes us human, what emotions lead us, and what forces press upon us. The queens, representing aspects of us, further this exploration into humanity. Similarly, Vendrick is an interesting character and not a stale recreation of Gwyn, though the two share some similarities in presentation. Despite his initial appearance as a hollowed, warring king similar to Gwyn, he's very different from the latter. He's genuinely sympathetic, a king who has respect for his people and for his queen despite her betrayal. The fact we can go and interact with him in the past is also an interesting part of the narrative, and he's the main reason why we discover the cure for hollowing. I do wish we saw more of the time travelling mechanic because it is super intriguing and an evolution of what the first game put down. The idea of times and worlds converging is a big part of the franchise, and so time travel certainly makes sense within the universe. We see it in Dark Souls 1 and 3 within their DLCs. But unfortunately, here it's cut content, but what we got is still an interesting part of the story. There's two criticisms of the story then that I've combated. The idea that the story is completely disconnected from the other two games, and the idea that it's simply a rehashing of the first game. Both are untrue, as we've explored. I think the story is rich and interesting, but unfortunately suffers from cut content, so a few concepts like time travelling are underbaked. Still, if you're willing to engage, it's an enjoyable experience. On a similar note to the story, let's consider the NPCs and characters we meet here. I think the fan favourite is Lucatiel, and for good reason. Her story is tragic, but also a very powerful display of resisting fate and forging your own way in spite of it. She's similar to us in many respects, a knight with a failing memory and the singular desire to discover the truth of our shared curse. If we look at hollowing as an allegory for depression, as many have, I think she's extremely compelling, and I wish she had an alternate quest ending like Solaire. Anyone who thinks this game is full-on bad with nothing redeeming has clearly not followed her quest through to this dialogue. It's wonderfully written and proves just how much her presence adds to the experience. We also have Gavlan, the other fan favourite who's loved for much simpler reasons. He's just a funny little guy. I think he's charming and a fun addition, but I'm sure it's no surprise that I prefer Lucatiel. And of course we have to discuss Aldir. He's interested in breaking the various cycles he and the rest of humanity are stuck in, and clearly finds success in it as we see he's created a new form for himself and even created a false dragon. Weirdly enough, he plays a similar role to a firekeeper, a guiding force connected to bonfires. Even more so than Shanalot, he seems to be the one encouraging our actions. But he also offers us the question, do the ends justify the means? We know his experiments were horrible enough for Vendrick to shut Aldir's Keep away, and he didn't find a cure for humanity, only a half cure for himself. He's definitely a character I'll explore further in a later video, but he adds a lot to the story and I wish he would have returned in some form in the third game. Shanalot is another character I really love because she's a very standout take on the concept of Firekeeper. As I mentioned, Aldir seems more like a Firekeeper than she. She's this mysterious and somewhat apathetic woman you're left turning to for guidance. It seems she's fallen into this role of Firekeeper, instead of being actively engaged with it, like the Keeper we meet in Dark Souls 3. which of course makes sense when we learn more about her. She was created to break the curse, but failed, and now brings in and guides the undead who arrive at the shores of Drangleic. So she isn't really a firekeeper at all, which makes her all the more interesting to me. As with life gems, a lot of Demon Souls concepts reappear here, and Shanalot is a lot more similar to the Maiden in Black than to the firekeeper we meet in Dark Souls 1 or 3. She and those other maidens are definitely worth an entire video of their own, so I'll stop rambling for now and leave it for another time. Most of the other NPCs are fun additions, though there are many forgettable ones, more so than the other two games. Regardless, I think they further my point that this series provides a lot more than difficulty in boss fights. There's a lot more to enjoy, especially in this game, if you rid yourself with this idea that Dark Souls is primarily a game based around difficulty. I'll finish this point with a brief comment on the characters who aren't exactly NPCs. Nashandra is a brilliant character, and the other three queens we meet in the DLCs are amazing too, though I've explored each one thoroughly in a previous video. I love how they put emphasis on one core emotion of humanity. I love that even without speaking to one of them, we can take away so many themes and points of commentary. And the feud between Fume Knight and Velstadt is a great piece of character writing which can be completely missed if you aren't thorough. It's genuinely such a cool detail that wearing Velstadt's armor triggers Fume's second face immediately. It's one of those little things that truly makes the game special. So as we can see, the characters in this game are mostly excellent and there are some very vibrant highlights. It's a staple of the franchise for sure, but since the hate for this game is absurdly overdone, I don't think there's been nearly enough praise for the parts of the franchise that Dark Souls 2 captures excellently. The next strength I'd like to consider is the enemy and boss design. There are a lot of enemies, so I won't cover every single one, but there's some standout designs I'd like to bring up. First off, let's consider the humanoid armor guy enemies. I think the Hades Knights are the best design here. They're iconic and also interesting from a gameplay perspective. Coming across a knight that seems completely disinterested in you is so interesting. They become a bit of a mystery, especially when you find the few that are scattered outside Hades. I think the second best design is the Dragon Knights in the Shrine. Their armor is so cool, absolutely top of the line. They're also generally a cool enemy. I like how they're completely chill as long as you respect their rules of battle. The stairway up to the Ancient Dragon is a very fun set piece. You're surrounded by this breadth of guards who are perfectly fine with you as long as you beat their top warrior. I also love the executioners on a purely personal level. I played this game when I was really young, and I remember being terrified of these guys during the chariot run back, so of course I look back on those times very fondly. The Alon Knights are iconic, and not just because they're annoying. Both the knights and the captains have appealing designs, as I'm sure you can see. Their movesets are a part of that appeal, I think. They appear very disciplined and precise when compared to any other enemy in the game. Let's praise the non-humanoid designs a little too, because this series has tons of more fantastical creatures that are sorely underrated due to people's love for armor guy with sword. I am a huge fan of the flame salamanders. I think they are absolutely magnificent creatures who definitely should have reappeared in the third game. I love them perhaps more than I love myself, and I may be their only true advocate because I highly doubt you'll meet someone as impassioned as I over flame salamanders. I also love the Dark Dwellers for a similar reason I like the Executioners. I was absurdly terrified of these things as a child, and I think I may have had a nightmare or two about them. Therefore, they're iconic, and I really like them. They've got a fun mechanic gameplay-wise with being afraid of fire, like the spiders. My last standout choice is definitely the hand creatures from the Black Gulch, which are apparently called Dark Suckers. I assume they're the living versions of the Dark Hand. I think they're a simple but effective enemy design. The rest of the more monstrous enemies are good in my opinion. They're all quality and add flair to the game, but those are my personal standouts. On to bosses. Let's first consider all the standout designs. The typical armor guy with sword bosses are amazing in my opinion. Each one has a unique design despite following the same kind of structure. My favourite is Fume Knight, but every other knight is top quality and unique in their own way. The Pursuer is noteworthy because of their presence throughout the game, but also the sort of ghost typing thing they've got going on. Of course, Looking Glass Knight is fantastic. I literally stole their helmet for my branding. And Velstadt is another fan favourite who stands out mostly due to his weapon. It's super unique, but his armor's cool too. And whilst I thoroughly enjoy armor guy with sword or bell fights, the more monstrous boss designs are fantastic here. They tend to go underrated because they're often gimmick fights, and for some reason the fandom has a dislike for gimmick fights despite them being integral to the series from day one. These designs are great in Dark Souls 2, it's a random choice I know, but the Demon of Song is one I really like and I can't even explain why. It's just gross and weird, and you're not really sure why this is the thing you're faced with at the end of Shrine of Amana. It's genuinely a freak, and I really like that. The Last Giant and Giant Lord are a design I love because, as I've mentioned, I love the giants in general. It's a shame that these two fights suck, but I still enjoy their overall look. Smelter Demon is a mix between typical armor guy and a monstrous design, and I think it nails what it's going for. I can't begin to describe the pure joy I felt upon seeing it again in Night Rain. It really is peak and a pretty good fight. I wouldn't be surprised if this was many people's favourite, and it's definitely one of mine. Dark Lurker is somewhat similar, a mix between the humanoid armor guys and a more monstrous style, and like the Smelter Demon, it looks awesome. The fight is great too, but unfortunately a significant number of the player base hasn't bothered with it, so he's pretty underrated. The questline can be tedious, but a tedious quest in Dark Souls shouldn't surprise you. I thoroughly recommend making your way to this boss if you haven't done so. The last stand-up design for me is for sure Nishandra. She looks really gorgeous in the most villainous way possible. She's an interesting character with a fantastic design, and I think her presence elevates the game despite the meh gameplay of her fight. Most of the other designs are good, though I don't consider them standouts. Skeleton Lords, Ruined Sentinels, the Lost Sinner, etc. There are a few weak designs, the rat bosses, Myther, and Covetous Demon most notably. But nothing is perfect, and this game definitely isn't. I think the fact that most of the designs are good, with some seriously great ones, shows that overall, the quality is high. That's the end of the big things, the factors I had the most to say about. Let's move now to consider the smaller things this game does well, though, of course, some of you will contend that the following factors are much more significant than I propose. This video is a very personal, subjective review, so do let me know if you have any other thoughts as we move on. Let's begin with something I definitely should have brought up in my original video, the sheer amount of gear this game provides. I don't think a massive amount of weapons adds that much really, because they're not absurdly different within the same type, though a decent range is still enjoyable if only for aesthetics. But the amount of armor is something I seriously enjoy. There's over 100 unique sets, and like the levels, there's a huge variety in colour. I love the armor in the third game, but a lot of it is just a different variant of a typical knight set, which is fun, but I thoroughly enjoy all the weird options Dark Souls 2 gives you, some of which I'll be showing on screen. It's a shame we didn't get the original mannequin mask, but there's still a lot to love here. If you're someone who's hyper-focused on gameplay and difficulty, then this won't mean a lot to you, but there is so much more to enjoy in this series, and this is one of those things. I genuinely find making outfits in the second game super fun, so it's no surprise my persona was created here. I also think farming for certain rare armor is an enjoyable addition, gives you something extra to collect in new game runs. Though the Lois soul grind is maybe a bit overboard, it's nothing new to the series, especially when we look at the grinding you're subjected to in Dark Souls 3, and it does provide some really clean armor which I actually do use on my character, if you've noticed. Well done if you have, you're very perceptive, I'm truly impressed. Because the colour palette is brighter and more varied in general, the armor benefits, and we get some super unique stuff like the Moon Butterfly set, the Rampart Golem set, and the Xanthus set. Just look at a side-by-side of that set in this game and in the third game. It's literally night and day when it comes to colouring. I don't dislike the paler colouring, and it makes sense for the themes of the third game, but I definitely think there should be a fun range of colours to choose from. If you want to dress up like a washed-out knight, then you should be able to do so, but having fun, brighter colours on occasion does nothing but add to the fashion of the game. Next up, this video wouldn't be complete if I didn't mention bonfire aesthetics. I have a bit of a unique perspective on them as a content creator, especially when I was actively making TikToks. Aesthetics made it so much easier to get footage when I needed it. Say I needed a clip of a boss I didn't have, in the two other games I'd have to ask one of my friends or speedrun to the boss. Because I've always played console, I never had any other option and it was mind-numbingly frustrating. But whenever I needed something from the second game, everything was smooth and fantastic because of this lovely item. That's my hyper-specific praise, but there's still a lot to love for the regular player. It adds a layer to the gameplay that neither of the other games have. Bosses are a huge draw for many people, and having such an easy way to refight them is a clear strength. It also makes farming easier for anyone who wants to do that. It's kind of absurd that the third game didn't bring these back in some form, especially seeing as the boss roster is a lot stronger than it is here. In fact, bonfire aesthetics omission makes zero sense whatsoever, but I'm sure everyone online has already said that. We also have the Pharos Lockstones, which I've never heard anyone complain about nor praise, so I'm curious on what the consensus is. I think they're an enjoyable secret mechanic, though I would have liked if there were a few more uses besides put the stone in, and then an illusory wall appears right next to it. For example, I like the effect it has in No Man's Wharf. It's a more interesting application of the concept. It would have been fun to use a lockstone then find an illusory wall later in the level or something. Either way, I enjoy their presence. And this factor is tiny, but I'm still going to give it a mention. I like how Dark Souls 2 gave torches more uses, though that is counterbalanced by the fact you now have to light them instead of having them always accessible. They ward off spiders and dark lurkers, making both No Man's Wharf and Brightstone Cove a lot easier to deal with if you engage with the mechanic. It also makes Freya's boss fight easier, and I definitely wish something like this would have been implemented for ROM. Then there's power stancing, which many people cite as one of the greatest things this game does. I, however, have never used it until making this video, so unfortunately I don't have a huge amount to say. To use it, you need to have 150% of the base stat requirement of each weapon. Equip them both and you're good to go. You've got new, powerful attacks to use at the expense of added stamina. Despite my personal ignorance on the subject, I think it's a great addition simply because it adds more options to the combat system. I know I mentioned earlier that having a huge weapon arsenal isn't that big of a strength because most of these weapons within the same typing are similar, if not identical, in many ways, but power stancing is able to take advantage of that arsenal in a unique way. Yes, many of these weapons are similar, but this system allows you to dual wield them and gives you new attacks whilst doing so. So I do think it's worth the praise it gets, as it adds a nice layer of complexity to the game. Okay, last factor on the menu, the PvP. Like power stancing, this isn't a part of the game I experienced much of personally. I've heard all these grand tales of the height of Dark Souls 2 PvP, and yeah, it sounds great, but I haven't seen much of it besides the odd invasion. It does seem that the fandom agrees on the quality of this factor though, so I've included it to avoid comments like, "You didn't include PvP, does that mean you think it's the worst in the entire franchise?" or a similar misconstruction of my views. I engaged a lot more with PvP in the third game, which I found extremely fun due to the presence of Covenants, but I'm sure it was great in the second game because everyone very confidently says so. Overall, these smaller factors add up to make the game a special and unique experience. I think that's what makes Dark Souls 2 so appealing to me. It really does feel like one of a kind. All these fun little details add up to create a great experience within the series. Yes, it has its flaws, but if you give the game a fair chance, there is a huge amount to love. Yes, I did say that was the last factor, and I bet you guys are expecting an outro now, but I'm here from the editing room to provide a speed round. And I'm still going to miss things, so don't be angry with me. Here are just a few extra secrets and details that make this game a wonderfully special experience. 1. New Game Plus actually adds new things and makes areas more challenging, most notably through its addition of red phantom enemies. 2. Also regarding New Game Plus, the extra appearance of Duke's dear Freya is a really awesome addition that I think may be one of my favourite little things about this game. 3. Did you think lighting all the torches in the gutter was pointless? Well, it kind of is, but it does spawn an NPC who drops the Black Witch set. 4. Once you've acquired this item from Elium Lois, you'll actually be able to see invisible enemies in the base game. Genuinely a fantastic detail. 5. You get a pickaxe if you feed a pig truffles. Yes, this is an extreme oversimplification. 6. Sarlon is an amazing fight and he takes his own way out if you defeat him without taking damage. Trust me, I have that footage, I just can't find it right now. 7. There's a whole hidden enemy you'll only find if you light this hidden statue in the crypt. I only found out about this very recently. 8. There's this hidden memory you can enter which appears as though it had greater lore relevance at some point in development, but is now this strange liminal place where nothing much happens. 9. This took me forever to record, but you can actually deflect throwables. And finally, number 10. The BDSM tree. So that's the end of the video. I felt the need to make a sequel to my original essay because it's very true that I didn't put enough praise in there. There's a lot to love about this game, so I had to cover it again. In case you missed my pinned comment last video, I'm currently in between jobs, so that's why this video came out so quickly, and why I also want to hear about the games you guys would like me to cover. I've got a lot of time right now. I've had Hollow Knight requested a few times, so as soon as I finish that series, I'll see if I'm inspired, but if there's anything else, please do let me know in the comments. But that is all for today, so remember to subscribe, join the Discord, and support me on Ko-fi if you'd like. Thank you, and goodbye.